That said, let's jump right into our first session of the day. I am pleased to welcome up Solmaz Shahalizadeh, Vice President of Commerce Intelligence at Shopify, to the TWiMLCon virtual stage to help me get things kicked off. Welcome, Solmaz.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Super excited to be here today.
I am super excited for this conversation as well. This is not the first time we've spoken. In fact, we first met some 4 years ago, right after you launched one of the first models into production at Shopify. Catch us up. Tell us about where you were then and what you've been up to since.
For sure. Yeah. So I think the first time we spoke was in 2017, which seems like ages ago. And it was right after we had launched our first machine learning model in production. For those who don't know, Shopify is a commerce platform empowering entrepreneurs and businesses across the world. And the first machine learning product we had was something to detect the fraudulent orders as they were being placed on a platform. And at the time we had just shipped this, it was a model running in real time with real business impact. And I remember I was really excited to walk you and the podcast listeners on different steps of taking a model and making it really part of production and part of a product.
The joys of virtual conferences.
Exactly. Yeah. Before we were so fortunate, we would have all these like AV teams to support us. So I apologize to the audience if I had to do the poor job of AP myself a few times. Yeah, so as I was saying, we were at the time when we spoke in 2017, we had just done the first model. And I remember walking through all these steps and best practices we had come up for shipping that first model. And now you fast forward 4 years, now in every single line of our business and every aspect of commerce, we are using some sort of machine learning to improve the merchant experience. And sort of going that journey of, I think last time we talked from going from 0 to 1. And over the last 4 years, we've really gone from like 1 to 100, and how we had to invest in platform and really think about the culture and mindset of the team as we have done this growth.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, 2020 was a crazy year for all of us, but for Shopify in particular, it seems like COVID had a huge effect on your business. Can you talk about that and the implications that's had for data and machine learning?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, COVID was something that really changed the landscape of commerce across the world. Merchants and buyers were forced to deal with the pandemic, with the social restrictions. And one of the things we saw that was really interesting was that even the early days of COVID, we saw the signups to our platform going up in the areas that were under lockdown. So in Spain and Italy, we started seeing people signing up more and more to open their own stores. And it kind of makes sense if if you're losing your job, or if you always had an idea and you wanted to try it. Like, this was a time that people took the chance to do what they wanted. So by seeing that across the platform, one of the things we did was to offer a 90-day trial so everyone could try signing up and opening a store. But I think also COVID for Shopify was a point in time where, because we had data and because we had spent the years understanding our data, we were able to act really rapidly. Within the first few weeks, we actually made a task force of data scientists from each line of the business, and they would work together every day to say, what's the impact of COVID, not just on one product or one geography, but across commerce. And that enabled us as a company to react fast and help with the growth of commerce, but also help our merchants. We were able to see, for example, that because of COVID, financial institutions were not as willing to extend, for example, capital to merchants or to entrepreneurs. And knowing the trends that we saw in the market and the data we had, we were actually able to use our machine learning algorithms to actually hit one of the highest amounts of funding on the third quarter of last year. We were able to go close to $250 million. And that was all because through the years, we had spent the time to build the platform, build the teams that are so embedded into business, that understand the business through lens of data, and are able to articulate that back to the company, to the merchants, and to the broader world, really.
Awesome. Let's maybe take a step back and have you share a bit about your role and the organizations that you lead at Shopify.
For sure. So I'm the vice president of data science and engineering, and I oversee all of the data function. But I also recently taken this role of a product owner for our overall commerce intelligence group. And that's the wide portfolio of the data product. So from the data platform to groups like commerce algorithms, where we build foundational algorithms that can be used by different parts of Shopify, and then the insights and analytics that we share back to our merchants. So it has allowed us to really go sort of like the end to end from getting the data, processing it, understanding it, building products, and then really seeing the day-to-day impact that it's making on our merchants.
Got it. And can you talk through some of the main use cases for machine learning at the company? You've mentioned a few of them already, but you also mentioned that models have kind of infused themselves all over the place.
Yeah, and I always actually love it, even as a data person, that people say, "Can you tell us where machine learning is used?" Because we haven't made machine learning front and center of everything we do. We are still a product company focused on product and merchants, and then we use machine learning and data as one of the tools for solving problems. So we have done so in like sort of behind the scenes in many areas. The Shopify Capital I spoke about, where we use probabilistic models to extend the cash to our merchants. For example, we have an app store and we have app recommendations so that every merchant knows at every point of time what's the right time to install the right app. We also are doing this massive effort to have a fulfillment network for our merchants. So we announced it 2 years ago. Our merchants can send us their goods and we would deal with the fulfillment and inventory management for them. So that has like a suite of machine learning models involved, from predicting the forecasting the inventory, predicting where the sales are going to be, buyer distribution, balancing between warehouses. Um, and then the other class of machine learning we do is building these fundamentals or primitives using machine learning that's now available to everyone. So, to give you an example, if one of the teams realizes that forecasting future sales of a merchant is useful, that on its own is interesting. But if you now make it available to any product that's being built in the company, that becomes a superpower. So that's part of what we invest in a lot, building those sort of foundational primitives to see how we can expand the value to our merchants. I'm working every time it goes off. I'll do my best to bring it back. So.
Okay. So you alluded to this in your comment about the forecasting tool and making that broadly available, but we're here in large part to talk about the role of enabling technology in helping organizations deliver machine learning into production more quickly and manage its life cycle. What's the role of platforms at Shopify?
Oh, I always say, if you're serious about your data, you invest in your platform.
Mm.
So the way we have done this is that we built few machine learning models, we brought them into our products, but the reality is, for machine learning models to have the capabilities and meet their full potential, they have to be a seamless part of the product experience. That means investing in how you train models, investing in how you deploy models, investing in how you monitor models and different features, and then how you keep track of it. So for us, it had a few steps. First, we started. I'm a big fan of not abstracting things too early. So when we had, for example, last time we talked in 2017, we had some best practices around how to deploy models, but we actually took a couple years, built a few more examples before we went into making that part of the platform, because you go through this trial and error and you see what works. So we came up with some best practices. Make sure you version your models with this process. Make sure before your model goes to production, we run this process, what we call shadowing. So we put the new model in production behind sort of a shadow flag, and we monitor the impact it's having on the users, and we monitor product metrics, not just model metrics. So we monitor the consequences of the model on the product, not just necessarily accuracy, F1 score, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And over the past few years, we said, okay, when we had one or two machine learning models and one or two teams working on it, best practices was good enough. But then now, we have hundreds of data scientists building these things, and you need something more unifying than best practices that are just like laid in a document or a handbook. So we have incorporated these into our platform. And we've invested a lot in a machine learning platform that allows us to have unified ways of training models, unified ways of doing services like inference services, monitoring features as they go live. And the other aspect is we do invest in this sort of like dark corner no one talks about is making sure we also understand the business really well. And we do that by investing heavily in dimensional models, understanding the business, and making sure the understanding of sort of what different data points means is shared between the rest of the company and the data team. So we invest in feature stores, we invested in really good data discovery, um, because I think like sort of the strength of everything else you have in your data platform becomes the strength of your ML pipelines, but also the shortcomings now become really obvious when you go to machine learning. The other aspect is sort of monitoring what happens once the model is in production. So I think that's also super important. You know, even the moment you make the model available and it's doing all the inference, the job of the team is not over. We have to make sure as the world changes, as the features change, the distributions change, there's either systems or humans that are aware of these changes happening, and they also know how to react to these changes as they happen.
Uh, Talk a little bit about the way you're organized to support the business. You mentioned that one of the things that you're very focused on is understanding the business. I imagine that the way you organize has a lot to do with the way you get to learn and understand the business.
Exactly. So the way we have organized is hundreds of data scientists is in teams that are day to day functionally embedded, but they actually, while they are embedded day to day, they all report to a central data discipline leader. And the thing that it results in is that on a day to day, they understand the business problem that they are solving, and they become a peer to the rest of decision makers. So it's not that this data team works in a silo and they just throw some solutions out over the wall, or they have transactional interactions where it's just passing a number back and forth, but they're really part of solving the problem. So data and machine learning becomes one of the many inputs, similar to how you have product, you have design, you have engineering. That's one aspect of it. The other part is that being sort of really embedded in the business, it means also you become really impact driven as a data team. You know where the business is going, you know what the product is trying to do, so you optimize for that. And as a result, you prioritize for machine learning models or solutions that have a real impact on the users. Because the other aspect, when I talk to people who are starting their journey of bringing machine learning to an organization, is really hard to find that first few problems to solve. Now, being embedded means you actually know those problems and you know the importance they're going to have. So that sort of embedded culture has allowed us to understand the problems, be peers with other decision makers, and then be able to really have that central unit. So as a discipline, we have best practices, we have expectations, and things like that.
Awesome. Awesome. I should mention that one of the advantages of doing conversations like this live is that we can allow our audience to ask questions. And if you jump over to the stream tab, you'll see a chat sidebar, and you can jump in there and ask any questions, and I'll be monitoring that. Solmaz, getting back to kind of organization there, how how has it evolved? Did you kind of have the right organizational model, and from the very beginning, and it just worked and it grew with you, it scaled, or did you have to evolve it along the way, either as the team size and composition changed, or as the team grew?
I think maybe on the surface, the structure was always the same. We've always been a discipline at Shopify, data science and engineering, and had always had a single leader. But one thing that we emphasized a lot over the past couple of years is this idea of really being embedded and understanding the product. And I think we learned through some trial and error, of course, we would have teams that are really capable, say, in building recommender systems, but they would be working in a silo, and they would build this like amazing models, but the path to bringing those models to production was so uneven and so unthought of that those models would not see the light of the day, or they would take longer before they show the value. So one thing we did, we said that, okay, if we really are focused on impact, data and machine learning is our tool. It actually doesn't matter what your tool is if you know what the end goal is. So we have put a lot of focus on that. That also impacts the sort of hiring we do. So we really look for data scientists or machine learning engineers that can get joy out of the real life usefulness of what they do, that can make a piece with using the simplest model possible when they start, and then making it more complicated and more complex as the product grows. So I think that mindset of being impact driven has really shaped how we think of the team and who we hire and how we grow it.
Mm-hmm. So a question in from Neil, you talked about how the team is embedded and that helps focus on impact. Have you seen in your experience that go wrong, not necessarily at Shopify, but when a team isn't focused on impact, what are some of the failure modes that can happen?
Yeah, I think we try to, even when we see it, we try to correct it quickly. So one of the things we notice is when the team is not really embedded properly, they are sort of like one step behind or not in tune with where the product and the company is going. So for example, they don't know if this product is just shipping, just being open, or is it the time for like machine learning to provide value. I am not sure why my camera is doing this, so my apologies.
We'll work it out.
Okay. So I think the challenge in those scenarios, one of the signals you see quickly is that if you ask the machine learning team, what are you working on and what are you optimizing for, they give you one answer. And if you ask the rest of the product team, what are you working on and what are you optimizing for, they give you a different answer. And I think that is a really good signal to find that the two are not working on the same thing. The other part is that success of machine learning in any team really is how well they can articulate the work they are doing. So if even if just the lead of the team is able to articulate the value of the product, the model that you're building in the terms and terminology that product understands, that already pushes your team forward. Versus, we've all had like extremely talented people that are hyper focused on like the mathematical notions of the model they're working on, or the speed, or the coolness of it, which don't get me wrong is amazing, but how you translate that, how do you bring it to what the company is working toward? I think that's the other part that you can find. The good thing is like, all of these things can go wrong, but if you have one successful project that really works, that really has impact, ships quickly, then that becomes the example that evangelizes for you. So you don't actually have to do it in person, but that one first or initial success becomes really important.
What was one of those successes for you at Shopify?
I think our fraud detection that we talked about in 2017 was that one for a few reasons. We had a lot of data, so we didn't have to wait for data to come in. This was a sort of challenge for every single one. So when we had the model in production, it wasn't waiting months to see if it had an impact. And then the impact was really understandable. Like we were optimizing for more sales for the merchant going through, and there was already a product experience around it, so we could see the lift in the metrics and we could see the impact. The other part that we had to sort of optimize for was that fraud detection happens on the path of checkout. And for a commerce platform, checkout is the heartbeat. So we had to be very careful what model we use, how long the inference takes, the freshness of features, so that we don't slow down checkout. Because no one would have came to me and said, "Oh, well done for shipping this model, but it delays checkout by 2 minutes." Like, so understanding the realistic parameter of the problem and what we really had room to play with, I think, was what made it successful. And then being really clear in articulating the value. So I wouldn't talk about like the false discovery rate or things like that, but more so like this has resulted in yay many dollars for the merchants, or this has resulted in so much less time spent sort of validating orders and things like that. So I think articulation back in a language that our users understood and the company understood was also extremely important.
How do you think about building a team in terms of the spectrum of finding specialists down to kind of the minute detail versus hiring quote unquote unicorns or full stack data scientists or what have you? different organizations tend to fall in different places on that spectrum?
Yeah, so for us, we have this mentality that we hold near and dear to our heart, is that we think of the full stack data scientist as people who is able to person who's able to write code for their own ETL on top of the platform we have, be able to sort of extract and transform the data they need when needed, build dashboards and reports on top of it, and when there's opportunity, use machine learning. So we go for more of a generalist. We also have a lot of focus on sort of coding capabilities. That also is part of the culture of our company, right? So you always have to build the team that is going to be successful in the environment you have. So Shopify is a fairly technical company. Even for our data pipelines, we do things like unit testing. We believe in those technical benefits. So that impacts how we grow our data team. Now, as the team has grown and the products we work on have grown, of course, we have room for more specialists in certain areas. So, for example, when you think of Shopify Fulfillment Network, then we do have a lot of folks that have operation research background, and that becomes like a key differentiator. But when we think like across the product, most of our data scientists are generalists.
Mm-hmm. And for in terms of supporting your platform efforts and tools, do you have a separate platform team, or has that been kind of homegrown and supported by the data scientists as they come up with needs?
So from day one, something we're proud of is we've always had a data platform engineering team. And I always say, like, strength of everything the data science builds is on the foundation of a strong platform. So from day one, from like literally 2014, we had an in-house data platform engineering team that built a data processing platform using Python and Spark. So everything data scientists or anyone else does at Shopify dealing with data is on top of this platform, and sort of anticipating the needs of data scientists. One big thing that we did over the last few years that helped us a lot was actually getting technical product managers for our platform. That meant that, as the data science team had grown and the sort of set of tasks they were doing and the kind of work had changed, it was really important to think about our platform now as a product, knowing like, is the next thing we're going to invest in a data discovery versus making ML pipelines better? Is it all of them having really product practices around that? So data scientists could anticipate and also give feedback on what the platform does. But also platform doesn't have to, take features in every day through Slack or something like that, but the more methodical and strategic look at what we need to build to be able to tap into the power of data we have.
There are a ton of really interesting issues that arise in the platform in the product aspect of platforms, and we'll dig into a lot of these later in the conference in some of our team teardown panels. But I'm curious at Shopify, how do your product managers and platform teams tend to manage the conflicts that come up between the various use cases and product teams that they need to support?
Of course. So, yeah, you're right. It comes up all the time, and I think the value is, first of all, like making sure we are investing in platform, so that there's like multiple parts of our data platform team that can focus on different aspects. But what you're pointing to, if I understood you right, is that there's always new innovations coming up in data, and we also want our data scientists to be able to innovate with the speed that open source community is moving. So we do offer sort of like a sandbox or playground where data scientists can try these things. And when they come up with a request, then they can say, okay, these are the use cases I would use it. This is how I tried it on, and the challenges I found. So I think that giving that space is also very important, because if you don't give that space, the danger is you have a team that's really archaic and no one wants to innovate in. I wish there was a magic point for how you balance that. But I think it's really from data scientists understanding the challenges in scaling, and then from the data platform really understanding the needs of the data scientist. So I think the thing we have been really successful on is making sure those feedback loops are open between our platform team and the data scientists.
Mm-hmm. We got a question in about how you balance shipping early and often versus shipping, the perfect model, or, the model that, meets all of your needs and expectations. I know that you're a big proponent of simplicity. Can you elaborate on the role that that plays, and how you strike that balance?
For sure. So we do say always ship early and often. One of the first things that we tell the team when they start on a domain is think about the product metric. So, for example, you're putting predictive model there. What's the minimum viable metric product in that sense, and what's the metric your algorithm has to hit? So often, for a desirable experience, actually the threshold is not as high as the best model. And the highest lift you get is actually going from no machine learning to some machine learning. So we optimize for the simplest model that gives a viable product experience. And that's really important. So I find sometimes when the teams want to find the perfect model, there is no perfect model. When you work with machine learning, everything has a probability, a non-zero probability of not working. And finding out what's the minimum product experience you want to enable allows you to know what's good enough to ship. Because as we all know, even when you have the best model, taking that model and making it power a lot of users is a different path. So I do always ask the team, like, what was the first 10 simple things that you tried? Now, I'm famous for saying, like, if regression solves it, have you tried it? The other side is, like, once you ship that, you show that like machine learning is adding some benefit, then you buy the team time to actually do more complex models. So we have areas where we started from very simple models and now we have deep learning in production, but it rarely is the first step we take, to be quite candid.
Hmm. Have you run out of the low-hanging fruit where you're at zero and you can sprinkle in a little bit of machine learning to get business results, or um, there's still opportunities there?
I think there are still some opportunities, as I said, like also sometimes you try a first version just to see is anything there? Is there any signal? And then once you see it's there, you run it behind an experiment and then you actually ship the full thing with a better model. I think because we have taken a step back and say what are the primitives we can enable with machine learning, we are looking at like more complex things. Um, but I do think in something like commerce, there's so much to do. So I think we still have a bit of low hanging fruit left. That being said, we never stop. So we never say, okay, we have a simple model running here. Let's move the team off of it. I think of that first model as the first step to see if actually the idea is working or not.
Hmm. And so, does the team that launches that first model stick with that model? The model becomes a product, and they continue to evolve it over time.
Yeah. So if the model actually has a premise, right? That and we take that if very seriously. So if yes, they do become, and they always focus on what's getting better in the product, right? So sometimes you improve things in the model and have zero impact on the product. Like we don't focus on that, but we do have very tight cycle of shipping things that improve product metrics. The other part is that like even if I mean we've talked about this earlier, but once you ship the model, the life cycle is almost just started, right? You have to monitor the features. You have to see as the world changes, are these features diverging or not? And then being able to like really have processes or understanding of what do you do when this happens. So I think that's the other part. So we have teams that ship it, and for now we actually keep the model maintenance with the team that has built it.
Hmm.
Um, and then once the sort of like for some areas, I think as the model becomes more and more complex, we might look into specific ML ops teams to handle that. But right now, we do leave it with the data science team so they can understand the reality of the model, and also they have ideas on how to improve it. So it's not a third party telling them like this feature you use actually is diverging quite drastically, but it's them with the context of the problem about how to solve it.
Hmm. Do you find or come across teams that struggle with the ship early and often and experimentation? And if so, how do you tweak that? How do you fix that?
Yeah, I think it's natural, right? Like, because most of the people come from this idea. There's a lot of focus when you look outside and you look on the internet on the models itself and on the novelty of models, and that's beautiful, and it's extremely valuable. But I think the part is I try to encourage them about thinking of the problem they're trying to solve. So the problem they're trying to solve is not to have a deep learning model. The problem is to be the best sales forecast for the merchant, or the best shipping rate recommendation for the merchant. So I think like if you can ignite that interest in the final outcome, then it becomes easier. The other part is like really defining rituals around machine learning work as well, similar to how we have rituals around like rest of building a product. So we say, okay, you have cycles of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or however, whatever works with the culture of the organization, to show benefit. And like if you had an idea of a set of features, they're not going to give value. Just like at some point, you have to abandon and go back to the drawing board. So I think that's the other part, sort of balancing this sort of art and science in machine learning. But I think it comes from rituals. I would say that the team that ships like something successful and sees the impact, then that becomes a driving force for them. So it's just like getting them to that first few iterations, and then it becomes really a self-driving team.
You mentioned rituals. What are some of the rituals that have evolved there in support of iteration and experimentation?
So some of them is making sure that we have same cycles around model development as we have around rest of the software development. For example, if you start looking at a bunch of features or a bunch of potential models, like have a timeline around when you would see basic signals around that. The other part is making sure, so that's sort of like in development practice. The other part is making sure that also when I say, okay, we ship the model, we want the data scientists to continue to monitor it, that needs time, right? It's not like someone's side of the desk. So building that into the life cycle of the models, life cycle of the teams, and then how it has to go. So yeah, the other part is like making sure, for example, there's time dedicated to how the data scientist would probably dig into seeing anomalies in the model, and like if we have an experiment, did it actually move the metric or not? The other part is building the culture that not everything is going to succeed, right? So I think that's also important, and as leaders to really say that we do experiments, not just to say X is better than Y, but sometimes also X is not the solution, and being able to like understand that, and the value of knowing something that doesn't work also is extremely valuable, because you know when you're not going to try it.
All right, we're going to pause briefly. It sounds like we're having some tech difficulties with the stream. And we're working to get those resolved quickly. I'm following some of that in the chat here.
No worries. I think today we were very fault tolerant. Everyone dealt with my camera going on and off.
Is it solved by just a refresh?
Mine is solved by turning it on and off, at least until I capture our chat.
So we were talking about rituals, and we were talking about, I think, making it safe to fail, making it safe for a model to not work and have to, scrap an effort. And, the data science teams, you build that culture in the data teams, but what about the broader organization, right? Organizations get used to more deterministic efforts and being able to say, oh, this is going to work, or this is when will be done, but it works a little bit differently in data science. How have you managed that?
Exactly. So that's where I think the value of sort of articulating the problem and the solution in a language that the rest of the company understands is very important. So when you start talking about machine learning, you should also be quite candid that these are the scenarios that the model probably is not going to work, and these are the fail safes we have in place. So when we started using machine learning models for Shopify Capital, where we give cash to merchants as a public company, that's a big endeavor. Every month, our data science team working on it would sit with a product manager and someone from finance, go through every feature, explaining like we are giving this offer to this merchant because of these parameters. And these are the checks we have in place. So I think being quite open actually about these are the areas that model probably is not going to do well. And these are the other conditions we build around the product to catch those are important. So I think, that non-deterministic nature of machine learning products takes time for companies to get. But that's why I think being open about it is good. So instead of saying like this model probably gives the wrong answer 2% of the time, translated 2% of the time, it's going to show the wrong answer. But before that happens, we have these things built into the product to avoid that. We have this set of guidances that when we think the confidence in an answer is not high, we actually show a different path to the user. So I think it would be a mistake to not mention those early on. And the best way, in our experience, has been to be quite open and candid, and also have sort of solutions around it when that happens. But I think that that's the work of the data science leaders actually to really make sure the company and the environment understands that.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll be talking quite a bit about that at the Executive Summit on Friday. If anyone is interested in attending and hasn't already confirmed their spot there, they can reach out to the event staff. You talked a bit, we've kind of bounced in and around talking about kind of the model life cycle and testing. And you mentioned that testing is something that's very important to you and your team. Tell us a little bit about your philosophy around model testing and, any of the platform that you've built in support of that.
For sure. So unit testing has different layers, similar to how you build things on top of platforms. So all of our platform is unit tested, but every aspect of how we use platform is also unit tested. So every feature we define is going to go through a unit test. Every model is going to go through unit testing, and then we do a lot of what we call like feature reconciliation. So the data sets that you use during training have to match the definition and the definition and the measurements of what you see at the time of inference. So we do a lot of testing around that. And for example, when we run our models in shadow mode, so weeks or a week before they power real user experience, we run them as if they're going to power the user experience. And at the same time, in batch, we're also running our sort of training pipeline in batch mode and our inference. And we check how close they are. Ideally, it would be 100% accurate. Sometimes you also notice that there's delays between data making it to your batch system versus the real time. But basically, we do unit testing and reconciliation around inputs. We do around how we build models, how we train them, and then around the deployment. And I think that's really important because in many cases, actually, deployment at least in early cases, happens in sort of like the traditional stack of the company. So for us, we were developing things, our first models, we were developing them in Python and Spark, but Shopify is a Ruby on Rails stack, our product. So we had to translate our model and make it run in Ruby. So that reconciliation became really important, both on the logic of the model and how the inputs were making it to the model.
And beyond kind of the unit testing, you're clearly monitoring drift in models that are in production. What was the impact of COVID on that? Did your monitoring systems go haywire, or how did they surface those kinds of shifts to you, and what did you see?
One of the very interesting ones, and I really like it because it also shows resilience of entrepreneurs, is that in the early days, as every business, every physical location of retail was closing, we saw a lot of like sales and movement in our retail businesses going down as people were closing shop. That was worrisome, but the beauty of it was like as these merchants bounced back, either by opening their business or doing things like pick up, buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, we saw that picking up again. So we have, as I said, we have a forecasting service, so you can drop different metrics that you care about as a company and monitor those. So those systems were interesting. But yeah, early days of COVID, that entire dashboard looked way more red than I'd like it to.
And what is that? Does that trigger off automated retraining, or is there a human in the loop
There's
in
a
that
human
process?
in the loop. Yeah, so there's a human in the loop because we think, detecting anomaly is cool, but what you learn from the anomaly becomes more important, right? So, like, yes, we saw this anomaly happening, but what does it mean for retail? What does it mean for the rest of the company? So, I think when we look at that dashboard, it's not just the anomalies that are important, but the reasoning behind them, and we keep a history of that in the application. So right now we have a human in the loop. So as part of the team that has built that, they have sort of air traffic control every day. They look at the anomalies. They talk to other teams. And then it results either in like a business decision or retraining of the model. In many cases, you actually don't want to retrain, right? You want to still see how far from the initial projections things were. But I think that knowledge of what's causing it allows you to sort of monitor it better and be able to predict the impact of that, right? So we do a lot of causal inference to know what's the impact of this specific event happening. To be able to, by the time you're global and you have a lot of different users, it's really important to be able to um, really attribute the impact of something rather than like COVID happened, but the way it impacts retail is different than online, than different geos. So that
Mhm.
anomaly detection allowed us to really suss out the impact in different areas.
Okay. How do you approach issues of privacy and separately fairness, bias in the types of work that you're doing?
So one of the fundamental things is that we strongly believe that the data of our merchants belong to the merchant themselves. It's not our data. So the way we take that into practice, some of the things is that like we never use personally identifiable information for any training, for any model development. We also have um, coded restraints around like the size of a population we look at to learn from. The other part is actually and we had this from early days before shipping a model. We do this practice of backtesting. So we say, okay, if this model was in production, these are the predictions or assessment it would have made, and we slice and dice that based on known things. So, is it unfairly putting a part of the population or a geography more in one bucket than the other? Is it changing drastically the experience of a group of users versus another one? And we do push back models into development, and we don't ship them if uh, that is not agreeable with what we want. So I think part of it is like the platform, part of it is also making sure your teams actually think about this and you encode that into what your platform does. So we do check the impact on fairness, on various biases before we push things into production.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, that general uh, idea of using the platform not just as a technology enabler, but to encode kind of culture and process is a theme that we'll be talking about quite a bit in this conference. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more and some of the ways that it expresses itself in your org?
For sure, yeah, it's something we're super passionate about because when your team is small and you have 10, 20 data scientists, you can all talk in a Slack channel and say, okay, this is how we're going to do training, this is how we're going to do testing, and becomes best practices. You hopefully write it down somewhere that's accessible to everyone. But as the team grows, it's not just enough to know, it's also important for the best way to do something to be the easiest way. Because like if the way you can do something right is so hard that beyond like perseverance, there's no reason to do it, then no one would do it. So we take that really seriously, as in making sure, if we think about backtesting, if we think about unit testing being in place before a model goes to production, let's make sure actually the platform fails things if those are not in place. So in a sense, it is part of what allows your model to shift. And I think that has helped us a lot. So in the early days, we had said, okay, backtesting is important, but every team might do it differently. And it was really hard to look across and see how we are doing. But by building these best practices into the platform, we have been able to also onboard people faster. So part of that is also, if it's part of the platform, then it's part of the learning of the platform and onboarding.
All right. Yeah, I think I'd like to return to some of the organizational comments you made earlier because we've got a lot of A lot of interest in further exploring this, and in particular, it's the interplay between embedded and centralized, and um, how do you manage it? It seems like a fine balance that you need to walk, and how do you manage that balance? Or do you have teams that will get too embedded and or too centralized? The example that was provided in the question was centralized red tape, or not enough context to the business, too embedded, kind of losing sight of the best practices that you're establishing for the entire team.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question, and I think it's something that takes practice. So definitely, if you're too embedded and the team that you're working with doesn't understand the constraints of what good data science work looks like, what good machine learning model building looks like, it can be hard, right? Like your engineering manager can come and say, "I read this thing on Hacker News. It does everything super fast. Why don't we try it?" But forgetting that, like, your feature pipelines need to be stable. They need to have been unit tested. So I think there is this balance of making sure the the best practices of the discipline are known and are easy to do. So that's the other thing. If what your data science team has to do is so toil heavy and so hard that they continue to fall behind, you kind of push the organization to go ahead and do things the way you have not recommended. So I think part of it is making sure you have the right tools, the right conversations. The other part is that being central, as I said, data science is a newer uh, discipline, it's a newer paradigm. So I think that's the part that being a team helps with. Having that community that you can learn from, having those conversations that are really fruitful, like being able to look across the business is actually extremely valuable. So I think it's a fine balance. I think the other part is on the leader of data to be able to educate and inform sort of the executive team of like what are the benefits of data, because I think that's the part that takes a bit of work as well, making sure the impact of the work is known. um, because, like, data scientists are hard to come by, they're hard to hire, they're hard to retain, they are very uh, yeah, very hard to come by. So the best way is to actually make sure you're continuously articulating the value they are adding to the business. I think like the central versus embedded is also a function of the company and the company size. So I think if at some point the data science team is like thousands of people, then keeping, maybe you want to break it into few central teams versus like all central. So I think it's the balance between context and expertise, and you want to keep that. Yeah, you want to be able to reevaluate if it's still working or not.
There's definitely no one size fits all on that
Mm.
one.
And I know some of your speakers in the coming days have also really interesting opinions on that. So I think by the end of the conference, people have heard different takes on this.
hmm hmm So what's next for data and machine learning at Shopify? What do you see as kind of the big things on the horizon, both externally that will impact what you're doing internally, as well as things that you're working on that will change the way you work?
So when we formed this new group with like really heavy data products, one of the things I said is that last year the data team was able to at any point in time give the pulse of commerce and pulse of merchants to our team to know what to build. I want every merchant to be able to have that out of the pocket as soon as they join Shopify. So being able to scale understanding of the business is actually quite challenging. So some of the things we're doing is improving our insights and analytics that we give back to merchants so that they can also take the right decision about their business at the right time. That also means that not only the data team has a lot to do, but we also have to enable the rest of the company to be able to use that. So, for example, if you build a service that makes forecasting that simple, then you can think every engineer can use that easily, knowing the best practices and a platform that enforces those best practices. So, scaling that is going to be part of like the next couple of years. How do we enable everybody else at Shopify to use the platform to be able to take the benefits of that? Because at some point, success also means that everyone else can use the tools you have to do like the 80% of the work, and then for the more specialized ones, you still need like specialized data scientists. But the basics of machine learning, I think, empowering everyone in the company to do is very important.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Solmaz, thanks so much for joining us. Um, for everyone in the audience, so many apologies for the technical issues. But Solmaz, as always, is wonderful to chat with you and catch up and continue doing amazing things there at Shopify.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, and thanks to yourself and the audience for being patient with the very many technical difficulties.
And
Looking
thanks.
forward to the rest of the conference.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks everyone in the audience for all of the great questions. So we've got a few minutes before our next session starts, which will be at the top of the hour. This is a great time to check out the networking and meeting scheduling capabilities in the platform. Visit that people tab and get to meet some other people, folks that have asked interesting questions in the chat or the QA. It's a great opportunity to reach out and say hi. We will see you back in just a few minutes.